So, in the weeks just past, we've journeyed and we continue to journey through the Arctic conditions of this season and this crisis. 2 weeks ago, I spoke about Goethe's description of color as the suffering of light and described poetry as language transmitted through the prism of suffering. And I'd like to return to this theme as we consider the context of our meeting today in light of Valentine's Day. Because the myth of romantic love, all fluffy bunnies and scented pillows, does a serious disservice to one of the most important developmental stages in human life, that of loving and inevitably then also of losing love. The Christian writer Henri Nouwen, some of us will remember we studied one of Nouwen's books. Henri Nouwen put it this way: every time we make the decision to love someone, we open ourselves to great suffering, because those we most love cause us not only great joy, but great pain. The greatest pain comes from leaving. The pain of the leaving can tear us apart. Still, if we want to avoid the suffering of leaving, we will never experience the joy of loving. And love is stronger than fear. Life stronger than death. Hope stronger than despair. We have to trust that the risk of loving is always, always worth taking. Immediately on reading those lines, I was reminded of a verse from the great love song of the Hebrew Scriptures, the Song of Solomon. Set me as a seal upon your heart, as a seal upon your arm, for love is as strong as death, passion fierce as the grave. Its flashes are flashes of fire, a raging flame. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can floods drown it. Stephen Merritt's song, The Book of Love, was written maybe 10 years ago. Those lines were written approximately 3,000 years ago in the late Bronze Age, the Middle Bronze Age. And the writer of the Song of Solomon is not alone in discovering that our experience of love overlaps with our understanding of God, and the most up-to-date developmental psychology reconfirms that understanding of God, who is love, according to the writer of John, the first epistle of John, according to the highest injunction offered by the words of Jesus as quoted by Mark, to love God and our neighbor as ourself. And mark those words, we are commanded to love God and our neighbor as we love ourselves. So maybe we should take more seriously the emotional abandonment we might be putting ourselves through as a culture as we journey further from a sense of that love of God, a sense of connection with the divine. We've traveled further from that sense of connection than any culture before us has done, and we haven't begun to chart the emotional damage that may have inflicted upon us. The experience of love itself overlaps with our understanding of God, who is love. It's strange, writes Bob Dylan, one of the most prolific writers of love songs. It's strange how people who suffer together have stronger connections than those who are most content. Bob Dylan wrote, by last count, more than 500 love songs during a career in which he's enthusiastically blurred the boundary between the secular and the divine. He's explicitly underlined the biblical tradition that he quotes and directly quotes the Song of Solomon in Lovesick, I'm sick of love. He stands in this writing tradition, in a tradition of lyric writing about the pain and heartbreak of love that runs from the Song of Solomon through Sappho, who wrote in 800 BC, pain penetrates me, drop by drop. And via Dante, whose work was fundamental to the foundation of what we consider Western culture, and John Donne, through Pablo Neruda, through Denise Levertov, through Adrienne Rich, and our recent poet laureate, Carol Ann Duffy. All of them consistently imply, as all love poetry does, that the pain of separation is a reminder of the nature of our closer connection to God, of our suffering together through life, a suffering that Naomi Shihab Nye reminds us in her poem Kindness, allows us to see the fabric of the human condition as a fabric, an interwoven connectedness, because as we suffer, so we empathize. Well, last week, we celebrated Candlemas, at which we blessed all the candles in the church for our use through the coming year. Candlemas marks 40 days from the birth of Jesus, 40 days from Christmas, and is remembered in mainstream church tradition by the presentation of Jesus into the temple. And I spoke about these 40 days as a time of early infancy in which the bond between mother and child seems to be a whole world, a world indicated by this 40-day symbolic time. 40 days is sacred time many, many times throughout the Bible, and we're just about to enter into the 40-day cycle of Lent. But modern developmental psychology has revealed insights into the development of the human psyche, which indicate that this first spell of life in which the human bond between newborn and mother is a crucial component in our capacity for survival. We need this sense that we constitute a whole world in order to give us the drive to survive. And this phase of love is technically called narcissism, which has a dark overtone, but it means self-love. And without self-love, we don't have the drive to preserve ourselves. And it's next that we develop an awareness that there is an other also loving us. And through that developmental stage, through that awareness, we are given a context in which to develop, in which our psyche can have a chance to develop the experience of the dual nature of love. And assuming that these first two stages of development occur in some way, and I want to stress that I'm not suggesting that if those bonds aren't formed in the way we think of as normative, that there's no hope of developing this loving connection, because it will and does flourish in the most difficult of circumstances. And humans have proven again and again a capacity to discover and grow through love, to nurture love in the hardest conditions. But assuming that these two stages of development occur, there is a chance for a third kind of love to develop. And this is a more abstract love, which also takes in the world in which we live. In other words, through the development of the experience of love, first in the cocoon of infancy, and then in the tribulations and ecstasies of romantic love, we gain enough experience to widen our perspective into a third kind of love, which might be an abstract love, love for the work we do, say, or a love of purpose, a love of art, a love of learning, or humanity in general, what we might think of as a love of life, or a recognition that our love itself, might have an outworking in the world, that there might be a purpose for our loving. As the theologian Cornel West describes it, justice. Justice is love in action. And in this emerging hypothesis, psychologists suggest that there is a necessary interplay between these first three types of love, and that this interplay, falling out of love, experiencing the pain of separation, relying on the inner core self-love in order to propel ourselves back out through our suffering into the world with all its works, this interplay is necessary for love to work. In other words, you can't remain in any one of those stages. All of them rely on the other stages in order not only to work, but also to develop or experience a fourth kind of love. Now, I find, I'm sure you do too, that 70s disco music is the indispensable accompaniment to all serious theological thinking. And so it was that as I was writing last night, I remembered that Gloria Gaynor's song, I Will Survive, is probably as good a template for this triple nature of love, showing us how it works. The narrator, as you'll remember, tells us of a romantic love that has failed, and when it does, the self-love necessary to survive takes over. At first I was afraid, I was petrified, I kept thinking I could never live without you by my side, but then I spent so many nights thinking how you did me wrong, and I grew strong and I learned how to get along. I will survive, she thinks. But the third kind of love in that song is an invisible context, because although it isn't a feature acknowledged in the lyrics, it is the kind of love necessary to decide to write a fabulous disco anthem and go into the music industry and become a singer and make the record. There might be a purpose for our surviving. As the theologian Cornel West describes it, justice is love in action, or I've got all my life to live, I've got all my love to give, and I'll survive. I will survive. Hey, hey. But there is, as I mentioned, a fourth love that we need in order to complete this picture. According to the writer Mark Vernon, this fourth love is known in wisdom traditions as the most complete kind of love, and it's given many names, including universal compassion, the sacred, and God. This is the love that makes an openness possible, that reaches not just for others or for life or survival, but for nothing less than the infinite. Just as the first intimation of love allows us to realize that we aren't the sole being, that a mother or carer is already there loving us, already there loving us. So this sets up the preconditions for experiencing romantic and abstract love, and love of the world and love of justice. So this fourth awakening depends on the mature awareness that we aren't the sole originator of this sense of connection. It was already there before us. We joined it. We began to participate in it like swimmers in a great river. Just as we've been discovering within our spiritual practice that it is important not only to ask and communicate our own needs in prayer, it is also possible and even necessary for us to listen to that prayer which is latent within us, so that this fourth love may show us that it is not only we who yearn for the love of the divine, but the divine already yearns for our love. And that's why those words, 3,000 years in the preserving, those words of Solomon ring true to us, even in our deepest loss, in our separation or bereavement. Love is stronger than death, more powerful than the grave, because it is bigger. It is bigger than either the lover or the beloved. It is the ground and meaning of both.